Hey folks, welcome to The Faithful Skeptic. Today was a bit of a slow news day. I didn't have anything particularly interesting to talk about, but one thing I did find entertaining was a case out of Alabama where the headlines were obviously and comically biased. So basically what happened was you had a Republican incumbent who 2 years ago had criticized Trump, but in this current election is endorsed by him, who was being challenged in primary by a former Democrat. So, of course she wins, like, duh. And, but, the Fox News headline is, Trump-backed candidate wins in Alabama, and the New York Times was Trump critic wins in Alabama. And, it's just funny. Don't read too much from the headlines, because it's very frequently total BS, and also know your biases, and don't take any single news source as fact and normative, because these days they're all prone to hyperbole and exaggeration, also known as clickbait, and so if you want to know the truth, you got to read at least. You got to read the whole story first, because usually even the New York Times gets around to including all the relevant facts in the story, but it's usually buried way down in there somewhere. But read multiple sources. If an issue matters to you, read multiple sources, because otherwise you're not getting the truth. The other thing in the news today is Alexandria Cortez, one more delusional socialist in the Bernie mold. So she's in the news today for apparently being anti-Israel, which isn't really surprising. A lot of people are surprised about anti-Semitism on the left because they bought the idea that the Nazis were right-wing, which they're not. Certainly not in anything that we would recognize as right-wing in America. So they were socialists. They were Marxists who broke things down by race instead of by social class. It's kind of the same exact rhetoric, same exact everything. They just, they picked the richest ethnic group in their country to persecute, as opposed to just the rich. It's still left wing. It's still socialism. But anyways, I guess I could comment on the whole democratic socialism thing, and I have a friend who is a true believer in this stuff, and I guess an acquaintance from high school. I guess I don't dislike the guy, but we were never like close friends or anything. But we get in arguments on Facebook fairly frequently, because he's totally sold on this whole. He actually calls it libertarian socialism. Doesn't quite understand how that's a contradiction in terms. But what I'm finding with these situations and people who believe these things is that for a long time I suspected that they're just not in tune with reality. They're believing things that they're building their argument based on a world that doesn't really exist. And this friend of mine, he posted on Facebook, why he thinks what he thinks, and he's referencing 19th century anarcho-communist theorists as if their opinions are relevant about post-industrial economics. It's not a world that ever existed. It was a world that was predicted by people like Marx back at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, when we were crawling out of feudalism, and it's like, Marx envisioned capitalism as an extension of feudalism that included industrial capital instead of just land in the power structure. And, there was a brief period of time where there was maybe something to that, because technology was still developing relatively slowly. You might buy that steam engine that would run the factory for 100 years, but not anymore. I mean, industrial equipment today is outdated within a decade. The idea that there's any kind of aristocratic control of the means of production in the modern world is just silly. Because the means of production are constantly in flux. They're constantly being reinvented and rebuilt and remade and adapted and changing hands. And, it's just ignorance that drives a lot of these ideas. They're young kids out of college. They think, they read all this theory, but they haven't actually been out into the world. They haven't actually worked in a factory. They haven't actually talked to a CEO of a company. They haven't actually, they haven't actually seen what the means of production actually means, and how it works, and how it changes, and how it's not owned by one family or passed down through the generations. They just don't last that long. And the other, people have this fantasy that, a corporation is like that, this corporation, they've been doing this for 100 years. A big customer of mine is GE, and, they've been around forever, huge company, massive, but the GE that's building jet engines and wind turbines today is not the same entity that made light bulbs 100 years ago. It's just not. The executive team turns over every 15 years or so. The stockholders turn over pretty regularly. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters. It's the board, it's the stockholders, it's the executive team, and those people are constantly in flux. It's never the same people for more than a few years. And those positions don't get passed down by heredity, It's whoever wins the competition, I guess, that ends up the next executive. And so, yeah, I mean, look, if you're tempted by these idealistic socialist theories, I'm not going to tell you to go, subscribe to the utopian anarcho-capitalist theories either. But really, you got to understand how the economy works and how the world works. It's not that complicated. This isn't sophisticated economics. This is, hey, somebody's actually got to turn that wrench. Somebody's actually got to design that piece of equipment. That machine that makes those widgets is only going to last for 10 years, and somebody's got to build it again. And that's not some big family-owned aristocracy corporate thing. It's a mom and pop shop. It's an inventor. It's it's not the horrible 1%, and the 1% isn't the same people. It's 20% of the population will be in the 1% at some point in their life. So, I mean, how can you vilify that? You just have to be ignorant of these things to buy into this stuff. And unfortunately, that's their target market, is people who are ignorant of these things, people who are college educated, who've never really worked in industry. They've never really owned anything. They've never, they've just graduated from fantasy to fantasy, and now they're, living in some career where they don't actually see what they're doing. They don't see how it touches the ground. They don't see how it touches the people. And it's, especially people work in tech and stuff. It's like the stuff that they do, it's like it never really coalesces into something you put your hands on. And, when you've made something with your own hands and sold it, that teaches you something about trade. It teaches you something about the market, when you've been responsible for something. These people out and in the coastal cities, the coastal elites, I guess, that these people wait until they're like 40 to have kids. And it's like, you've never been responsible for anything. And you think that you can rewrite society? You've never changed a diaper, man. Like, grow up. So yeah, as Jordan Peterson would put it, put your own house in order before you judge the world. Know your economics before you judge capitalism. Make something with your hands and sell it before you judge the free market. So with that, I'll see you later, and I hope you enjoyed it. Like, subscribe if you so choose, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.